The industry rewards safety, but it rarely remembers it. Johnny Depp learned that early, when he realized playing it safe would slowly erase him instead of protecting him. He had the looks for easy fame, the studios wanted him boxed into predictable roles, and the money was guaranteed if he stayed quiet and obedient. But something didn't sit right. Instead of choosing comfort, Johnny Depp chose risk, even when it cost him roles, reputation, and years of uncertainty. This is not a story about luck or overnight success. It's about what happens when one decision to refuse safety quietly rewrites an entire career and changes how the world sees you. Johnny Depp entered Hollywood at a time when the system was brutally simple. If an actor showed early commercial appeal, studios shaped him into something safe, repeatable, and controllable. Depp checked every box they wanted. After early attention from television and teen-focused films, executives saw him as a reliable heartthrob product. The problem was that he felt trapped by that label almost immediately. In multiple interviews over the years, including conversations with Rolling Stone, he later admitted that the idea of repeating the same charming role terrified him more than failure ever could. Safety, to him, felt like a slow creative death. Instead of following the path laid out for him, Johnny Depp began turning down roles that most actors would never reject. These were films that promised steady paychecks, wide releases, and public approval. What he chose instead confused agents, frustrated studios, and worried people close to him. He leaned toward strange scripts, uncomfortable characters, and stories that didn't fit clean marketing categories. This wasn't rebellion for attention. It was a quiet refusal to let the industry decide his identity before he understood it himself. The risk became obvious early. After gaining popularity, he accepted projects that underperformed financially and were dismissed as odd or inaccessible. Critics didn't always understand what he was trying to do, and audiences who expected familiar charm were often surprised or disappointed. Hollywood doesn't like surprises unless they make money, and Depp was testing patience on all sides. At one point, he was openly described in trade publications as difficult to place, a polite way of saying studios didn't know how to sell him anymore. This is where most careers quietly fade. Actors compromise, adjust their image, and slowly return to safer choices. Depp didn't. Instead, he doubled down. He sought collaborators who valued imagination over formulas, directors who didn't care about opening weekend predictions, and stories that felt personal rather than strategic. His long-standing collaboration with Tim Burton didn't begin as a proven formula. It was a gamble rooted in shared creative instincts. At the time, studios questioned whether audiences would follow an actor into such stylized, unconventional worlds. What made this refusal dangerous was timing. Depp wasn't an established legend yet. He was still building credibility, still dependent on industry goodwill. Every strange role increased the chance of being labeled unreliable. Agents reportedly warned him that he was sabotaging his own momentum. But in later interviews, he explained that momentum built on pretending eventually collapses. He believed that if his career ended early because he stayed honest, that outcome was more acceptable than surviving by playing characters he didn't respect. This mindset changed how he approached every decision. Instead of asking whether a project would succeed, he asked whether it scared him creatively. Fear became a signal rather than a warning. That approach led him into characters that required physical transformation, emotional discomfort, and public misunderstanding. Some films failed. Some were mocked. But something subtle was happening in the background. Critics began to notice consistency in his unpredictability. He wasn't random. He was selective in a way that rejected ease. The turning point didn't arrive overnight. It came slowly, through accumulation. Each strange choice added another layer to his reputation as someone willing to disappear into roles rather than polish a public image. Audiences who initially resisted began to trust that if Depp appeared in something unusual, there was intention behind it. This trust is rare and fragile. It doesn't come from marketing campaigns. It forms when viewers sense authenticity over time. One of the most misunderstood aspects of his journey is the belief that risk eventually guarantees reward. Depp himself has pushed back against that narrative. In documented interviews, he acknowledged that refusing safety cost him financially and emotionally for long periods. There were years when projects collapsed, scripts stalled, and public perception turned cold. Refusing to play the game didn't protect him from consequences. It exposed him to them fully. Yet this exposure also built resilience. When controversies later erupted in his personal life, his career didn't rest solely on popularity metrics. It rested on a body of work that proved range, commitment, and depth. Critics revisited earlier performances with new appreciation. Audiences who once dismissed his choices began defending them. The same risks that once isolated him now form a foundation that couldn't be erased easily. His approach also challenged the industry's idea of branding. Actors are often encouraged to become predictable so they can be marketed efficiently. Depp's brand became unpredictability itself. That sounds paradoxical, but it worked because it was honest. Viewers didn't expect comfort from him. They expected curiosity. This expectation allowed him to move between genres, tones, and characters without completely losing audience trust. There's an important distinction here. Depp didn't reject success. He rejected hollow success. When large-scale commercial opportunities aligned with creative freedom, he embraced them. But he refused to reshape himself just to maintain momentum. This selective acceptance is often misinterpreted as arrogance. In reality, it reflects boundaries. Boundaries are uncomfortable in industries built on compliance. The long-term impact of this refusal reshaped how casting directors and filmmakers viewed him. Instead of being seen as a leading man in the traditional sense, he became a character actor with star power. This hybrid identity extended his career beyond the typical lifespan of heartthrobs. Many of his contemporaries faded as trends shifted. Depp adapted because he had never allowed trends to define him in the first place. In legal documents and public statements from later years, his team emphasized the consistency of his career choices as evidence of professional integrity. Regardless of public opinion swings, his working pattern remained stable: choose roles based on substance, not optics. That consistency mattered when credibility was questioned elsewhere. It provided a counter-narrative grounded in decades of documented work. Another overlooked consequence of refusing safety is influence. Younger actors have cited Depp's early career as proof that deviation is possible without immediate collapse. Not imitation, but permission. Permission to say no. Permission to look strange. Permission to fail publicly without disappearing. Influence doesn't always come from dominance. Sometimes it comes from survival. The industry didn't change overnight because of one actor, but cracks appeared. Studios became more open to unconventional casting. Audiences became more patient with odd narratives. Streaming platforms later benefited from this shift, valuing niche appeal over mass sameness. Depp's choices were part of a broader movement, but his visibility amplified the message. It's also important to address the myth that refusing safety means constant chaos. Depp's process was disciplined. Collaborators have described him as intensely prepared, detail-oriented, and respectful of craft. Risk didn't mean recklessness. It meant commitment without guarantees. That distinction matters, especially for audiences who confuse boldness with irresponsibility. By the time his career reached its most iconic moments, the foundation had already been laid through years of resistance. The success didn't erase the struggle. It reframed it. Interviews from later stages show a man aware that everything could have gone differently. There's no victory speech tone, no promise that his path should be copied blindly. Only acknowledgement that safety would have cost him something he wasn't willing to lose. This is where the real change happened. Refusing to play it safe didn't just alter the roles he played. It altered how success was measured. Instead of numbers alone, longevity, respect, and artistic memory became metrics. Those metrics don't trend daily, but they last longer. As the first chapter of this story closes, what stands out isn't rebellion, fame, or controversy. It's a pattern of decisions made quietly, often against advice, and without guarantees. Depp didn't know these choices would change everything. He only knew that playing it safe would change him into someone he didn't recognize. And that, to him, was the greater risk. The aftermath of refusing safety is rarely immediate clarity. For Johnny Depp, it arrived as a long stretch of ambiguity where wins and losses blurred together. There were moments when the industry seemed to reward his choices, followed by periods where doors quietly closed. This emotional whiplash is rarely discussed because it doesn't fit the clean narrative of courage leading directly to triumph. But in interviews given years later, he acknowledged that doubt never disappeared. It simply became familiar. Doubt stopped being a signal to retreat and instead became part of the environment he learned to work within. What separated him from many others was not confidence, but tolerance. Tolerance for uncertainty, for misinterpretation, and for delayed validation. While Pierce chased relevance through repetition, he accepted invisibility between projects. This choice protected his internal compass. He wasn't reacting to trends because he wasn't waiting for approval. This slowed his career in visible ways, but it strengthened it structurally. When momentum returned, it was grounded in depth rather than novelty. The industry's relationship with him grew complicated. Executives respected his talent but struggled with his unpredictability. Yet unpredictability eventually became leverage. When filmmakers wanted something that didn't feel manufactured, his name carried weight. Not because it guaranteed box office results, but because it suggested intention. Intention matters in an environment flooded with disposable content. Another shift occurred in how audiences perceived risk itself. Viewers began associating his presence with transformation rather than familiarity. They didn't expect comfort, they expected immersion. This expectation recalibrated audience behavior. People showed up not to see the actor, but to see who he would become. That subtle change is powerful. It creates loyalty based on curiosity, not habit. This loyalty mattered later, when external narratives threatened to overshadow professional work. Public opinion can be volatile. The bodies of work speak slowly and persistently. Long-form interviews, court transcripts, and documented collaborations provided a counterweight to headlines. Regardless of where opinions landed, one fact remained difficult to dispute. His career choices had been consistent long before controversy made consistency convenient. There's also a financial reality that often gets ignored. Refusing safety delayed wealth accumulation. He didn't maximize early earning potential. Instead, he reinvested time into experimentation. This decision contradicted conventional wisdom. But over time, the cumulative value of distinctive performances outweighed early losses. Not just financially, but in cultural permanence. Many safe careers peak early and fade quietly. His extended because it evolved. Collaborators have spoken about his work ethic during these years. Preparation wasn't optional. Risk required discipline. When projects lacked safety nets, effort increased. Details mattered more. The seriousness contradicted stereotypes that painted him as chaotic. The chaos was external. Internally, his approach was methodical. This contrast explains why directors continued returning to him even when studios hesitated. The ripple effect extended beyond film. Fashion, music, and art circles embraced his refusal to conform. These spaces value authenticity differently than corporate structures do. His cross-disciplinary presence reinforced the idea that identity doesn't need to be singular to be credible. Multiplicity became strength rather than dilution. As time passed, the early fear of being forgotten faded, not because he chased remembrance, but because memory formed organically around risk. Audiences remembered characters that felt strange, unsettling, or unexpected. Those impressions linger longer than polished perfection. Safety rarely imprints. Friction does. The most revealing insight comes from his reflections on failure. He never framed it as wasted time. Each misstep clarified boundaries. Each rejection narrowed focus. Failure wasn't proof of wrong direction, it was information. This reframing protected him from bitterness. Bitterness traps many artists into either retreat or overcompensation. He chose neither. By refusing to play it safe, he also refused to rush closure. His career doesn't resolve neatly. It remains open-ended, uneven, and human. That openness is uncomfortable for industries that prefer predictable arcs. But it's precisely what keeps relevance alive beyond cycles. This is where part 1 ends, not with a victory, but with a posture. A posture of standing inside uncertainty without surrendering authorship. The real consequences of that posture continue unfolding, shaping not just what followed, but how it was understood. What followed after that posture was not peace, the pressure of a different kind. When you refuse safety long enough, people stop trying to protect you and start testing you. Johnny Depp entered a phase where every move was overinterpreted. Success was called accidental, failure was called proof. There was no neutral ground. And yet, his approach didn't tighten. It softened. Instead of reacting defensively, he leaned further into patience. Patience with process, with silence, and with time doing its quiet work. This patience became visible in the gaps between projects. Where others rushed to stay visible, he accepted absence. Absence scared studios more than failure. Absence can't be controlled. But absence also prevents dilution. When he returned, it wasn't as a reminder of who he was, but as a question of who he would be next. That question kept interest alive even when narratives tried to flatten him. The idea that refusing safety makes you fearless is misleading. Fear remained constant. What changed was hierarchy. Fear no longer outranked curiosity. When faced with a choice between protecting reputation and exploring discomfort, he consistently chose the latter. This didn't make him immune to criticism. It made him less dependent on it. Dependence is the real trap in creative industries. Once approval becomes oxygen, safety becomes survival. He chose thinner air. There's a moment often overlooked in discussions about longevity. The moment when an artist realizes they are no longer chasing entry, but meaning. Depp crossed the threshold quietly. His decision stopped being about proving value and started being about preserving voice. This shift is subtle but powerful. It transforms work from performance into communication. Audiences sense the difference, even if they can't articulate it. When legal and personal storms intensified later, the groundwork laid decades earlier mattered, not as a shield from scrutiny, but as context. Context doesn't excuse, but it complicates. And complexity resists erasure. Simplified figures are easy to replace. Complex ones linger. His refusal to simplify himself early prevented others from fully simplifying him later. The media environment thrives on extremes. Heroes or villains. Safety or scandal. His career never fit plainly into either category. That ambiguity frustrated commentators but intrigued audiences. Ambiguity keeps conversation alive without demanding agreement. It invites reflection instead of alignment. This is rare in celebrity culture and uncomfortable for systems built on consensus. Financial recovery, professional recalibration, and public reassessment didn't happen simultaneously. They unfolded at different speeds. This staggered recovery reinforced a lesson he had lived by for years. Timelines don't synchronize. Waiting for everything to align before moving forward guarantees paralysis. He moved anyway, unevenly, imperfectly. Younger creatives watching from the outside often misread this as chaos. But chaos looks different up close. From inside the process, it's a series of grounded decisions made without assurance. Assurance is addictive. He detoxed early. That early withdrawal made later uncertainty survivable. By the time narratives began to shift again, his identity was no longer fragile. It wasn't propped up by momentum or universal approval. It was anchored in accumulated choices. Choices leave residue. Even when opinions swing, residue remains. Refusing to play it safe didn't make everything work out. It made everything honest. Honesty doesn't guarantee comfort, but it does guarantee coherence. His career, for all its turbulence, remained coherent. That coherence is what ultimately changed everything. Not fame, not redemption arcs, not reinvention. Coherence. And from the coherence, the story continues. After coherence came consequence. Not punishment, not reward, but consequence in its purest form. When a person builds a career on refusal rather than permission, the results don't arrive as applause. They arrive as weight. Every past choice begins to matter more. For Johnny Depp, this meant that nothing could be dismissed as accidental anymore. Supporters and critics alike traced everything back to intent. And intent is harder to argue with than outcomes. During later legal proceedings, statements submitted into record included past interviews, contracts, and long-term collaboration histories. These documents were not created to defend a narrative, but they ended up doing exactly that. They showed a pattern stretching decades, not weeks. Consistency became evidence, not of perfection, but of authorship. Authorship is what survives when control is lost. There is a quiet irony in how refusal works. When you refuse safety early, you gain little control in the moment, but you gain something else over time. Context. Context changes how actions are read. When storms hit his personal life, reactions were filtered through years of known behavior. Not all judgments softened, but many slowed. Slowing matters. Fast judgment erases nuance. Slow judgment allows it to breathe. The public often imagines redemption as a loud return, a dramatic statement, a decisive win. But his path didn't follow the dark. There was no single moment that flipped perception. Instead, there was accumulation. Interviews released over time where his language remained steady. Testimonies where details aligned with past records. Colleagues speaking without scripts. None of these moments dominated headlines alone. Together, they formed gravity. Gravity doesn't argue. It pulls. One of the most revealing aspects of this phase was how little he explained himself. Silence can be read as guilt or arrogance, but it can also be discipline. He had spent years letting work speak the four words. That habit didn't break under pressure. Rather than rewriting his identity to fit a crisis, he stayed inside the one he had already built. That decision prevented contradiction. Contradiction is what collapses credibility faster than error. There is also the matter of endurance. Refusing safety is exhausting. It requires energy not just to choose differently, but to withstand misunderstanding without constant correction. Many people abandon authenticity not because they don't value it, but because defending it becomes too costly. Depp absorbed those costs early. By the time scrutiny peaked, the muscles were already built. This endurance reframed how audiences engaged with his later work. Viewers didn't watch to confirm an image. They watched to observe continuity. Continuity is subtle, but it's persuasive. It doesn't demand belief. It invites observation. That invitation widened the gap between reaction and reflection. Reflection is slower. Platforms are not designed for it. But people are. Given enough time, patterns outweigh noise. This is where refusing safety intersects with time. Safety chases immediate acceptance. Refusal bets on delayed understanding. Delayed understanding is fragile, but when it arrives, it's harder to reverse. Industry responses shifted accordingly. Offers returned, but they were different. Fewer demands, clearer boundaries. Not because he asked for power, but because unpredictability had already removed leverage from those trying to control him. When someone has already accepted loss, threats lose meaning. This changes negotiation dynamics fundamentally. There's a misconception that playing it safe is about survival. Often, it's about avoidance. Avoidance of discomfort, of scrutiny, of responsibility for one's own voice. Refusing safety removes those buffers. It places responsibility squarely on the individual. If something fails, there's no system to blame. That weight sharpens intention. Intention shaped how his later roles were received. Critics began discussing choices rather than outcomes. Discussion moved from whether something worked to why it was attempted. Why is a deeper question. It assumes agency. Agency is the core of respect. Another overlooked consequence is how memory works. Cultural memory is selective. It retains what feels intentional. Safe work blends into eras. Risky work anchors them. When people recall his career, they don't list films chronologically. They remember shifts. Shifts signal authorship. Authorship is remembered longer than success. This doesn't mean refusing safety is noble by default. Many people refuse recklessly and disappear. The difference lies in commitment. He committed fully to each risk. Preparation replaced protection. Discipline replaced reassurance. This is not romantic. It's demanding. And it's why the refusal held. In later interviews conducted years apart, his language remained remarkably consistent. Not rehearsed, but aligned. Alignment is rare under pressure. Most people rewrite themselves to survive new contexts. He carried the same values into different storms. That continuity was not loud, but it was measurable. The industry often celebrates reinvention, but reinvention implies abandonment. What he demonstrated was evolution without erasure. Each phase built on the last rather than disowning it. This made his story harder to simplify, but also harder to dismiss. As time stretches forward, the full impact of refusing safety becomes clearer. It didn't make life easier. It made it owned. Ownership doesn't protect you from harm, but it prevents disintegration. When everything else is questioned, ownership remains traceable. This is the part of the story that rarely trends. There's no slogan here, no guaranteed outcome. Just a sequence of decisions made without assurance, held together by consistency. Consistency is not exciting in the short term, but it compounds. And the compounding is the real change. Not fame, not controversy, not comeback narratives. The change is that a career once considered risky became difficult to erase. Difficult to erase because it was never built on safety. It was built on choice. If this story made you pause, don't let it stop here. Think about where you're choosing safety over honesty in your own decisions, and what that safety might be quietly costing you. You don't need to agree with every choice Johnny Depp made to understand the pattern behind them. Patterns matter. If you value stories that go deeper than headlines, stay connected, share your perspective, and keep questioning the narratives that feel too simple. The most important conversations don't happen when everything is clear, they happen when you're willing to look closer.